Very nice.
Good. Right then, so hi everybody. My name is Olivier. I head up the Information Management Division of the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, the GICHD. So we're an organization that essentially helps national authorities deal with their mine action problem. So I'm here to really give you a bit of an overview of what humanitarian mine action is, and more importantly, of course, since this is Geomob, look at how GIS specifically supports that process. So first of all, let's set a bit of context to what we're talking about. We're talking about anti-personnel mines. But not only that, we also deal, so mine action also deals with what are called cluster munitions. You may be familiar with what those are. Essentially bombs that are dropped and then release hundreds of little bomblets that sort of carpet the ground. And typically a pretty significant proportion of those will fail to detonate up to about 30% or so. And so they end up lying around the ground and sort of posing the same kind of risk as landmines. You just need to step on it or tamper with it and it can explode. And more generally, mine action just deals with any explosive remnants of war. So whether it's unexploded ordnance, abandoned ordnance, poorly managed ammunition depots, as well as landmines, anti-personnel mines, anti-vehicle mines, etc. So any explosive threat that's left after conflict. We have about 60 million people worldwide who are considered to be exposed to that to dangerous areas. And while we used to think of mine action, or we used to sort of boast of mine action as being quite a successful, one of those sort of successful humanitarian sub-activities with a horizon in sight. There was a very steady decline in victims up to about 2013, when we started seeing a sharp increase in victims again due to the more recent conflicts that we've been seeing in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya, the flare-ups in Afghanistan, and a lot of the new victims are also due to the fact that not only have the conflicts increased, but the nature of the conflicts have shifted also to very urban environments, which brings about all sorts of new challenges, all sorts of new pressures, which is really driving those numbers up. If we have time, I might get into that, but only if we have time. So if you compare those numbers of victims, you might have seen it was around 8,000 a year now we're at. If you compare those to, the big three diseases which kill hundreds of thousands of people per year, and now of course we've got a new kid on the block with COVID, you might think, well, it's not a huge number actually, but of course that's just the tip of the iceberg. The big problem with mine contamination, with explosive risk, is the socioeconomic impact of it. If your country's just come out of war and somebody that you trust tells you, I think I saw somebody lay a mine in your backyard, you're not going to be stepping in that backyard until somebody comes and clears it, regardless of whether or not that was correct information. So it translates into an enormous amount of land, potentially productive land, that's just out of use. We use a ballpark figure of about 2 billion meters squared worldwide. So a massive socioeconomic impact. Now, what does all of that have to do with GIS? Well, of course, to manage mine action, we need evidence, we need information, and more specifically, we need geographic information. Mine action is a eminently geographic problem. If you think about it, we're defining the location of hazards and their proximity to other things, to vulnerable things of interest, vulnerable assets, populations, infrastructure, etc. And it's really that proximity, is that exposure to hazard, that exposure of vulnerable assets that turns a hazard into a risk. A hazard, a mine in the middle of a desert, as you'll appreciate, doesn't have the same risk as a mine on the route to a school. And so it's that risk that we want to be identifying and managing and ultimately reducing. And even once we've identified where the risk is and we've mapped it out, the next challenge is deploying pretty heavy assets and resources for demining across large areas, across difficult terrain. So just with those two questions alone of identifying the risk and then sending stuff over to deal with that risk, you can see it's a sort of a textbook GIS problem. I was on a on a field visit to a program a little while back, and the program manager there, she basically told me, look, when my job boils down to this, once these red hazard polygons have turned green, my job is done. That's kind of what it boiled down to. And obviously it's not about just changing the symbology. So what I'll do now is just sort of run you through the actual demining process and how GIS accompanies that. For about 20 years now, the GISHD has been working with Esri to design, develop, deploy, and help train mine action actors on what's called the information management system for mine action. And we use the term system here in a very broad sense. It's the GIS systems, but it's also all of the standards. It's the standard operating procedures. It's the organizational structures that go with it. And the latest generation of INSMA Core is in fact entirely built by configuring out of the box Esri tools to specific mine action use cases. So to illustrate this, we're going to go to Tajikistan, which is one of the countries that we support. So just north of Afghanistan there. Tajikistan had 3 conflicts in the 90s, which left quite a bit of contamination across the country there, as you can see. And the challenge there is that it's an extremely mountainous country. I think something like 90% of the country, you wanted some geo-trivia, Ed, 90% of the country is mountainous. And 70% of the population is rural and uses those areas for herding. So operationally very complex, but we need to access those areas precisely because they're being used. So how do you go about getting rid of a problem that you know is out there, but that pretty much by definition and by design you're not going to see very easily? This right here is the job of mine action. This is demining. This is what it is. It takes literally digging stuff out of the ground. So you're not going to be going about digging up all of Tajikistan. So we're going to need to narrow down our search to where we're confident we'll be able to find something. So the big question is, where do you even start? If you're lucky, there are some old minefield maps, literally by more sort of conventional armies, that will have mapped the location of where they have laid mines so that they can come back and remove them. Most often than not, minefields are not conveniently mapped like that. And even if they are, mines can move through flooding events, through landslides. So old maps aren't necessarily super reliable. So instead, what we do is systematically report or record incidents that people record and call in. So either they've literally seen something that looks suspicious to them, or they remember soldiers working the ground during the conflict. Or one of their goats literally has stepped on a mine, or more tragically, of course, somebody they know has stepped on a mine. Now, what we'll do then is we'll record those incidents. So those incidents will be the first entry into IMSMA, the Information Management System for Mine Action. We use Survey 123 for this. For anybody who's used that, it's a very easily configurable tool, really powerful form-based application with a lot of good logic on it. Very easy to configure to different use cases. And those are those incidence reports are what then triggers the tasking of more structured and targeted surveys. So either through either technical or non-technical surveys, we call them, depending on the methodology used. So in technical survey, it'll be community interviews and witness accounts. In non-technical surveys, it's community interviews. In technical surveys, we'll be using technical assets like these flails that basically beat the ground with chains and detonate mines, not to get rid of the mines, but to identify patterns of minefields, or animal detection, so dogs or rats at the moment. So it's these surveys that then define more precisely our hazardous polygons, again collected through survey 123, and then validated. So there's a whole process of data quality management that happens there, and a lot of gateways for that data to get validated. And we're using again Esri's web app technology there for data validation, and that's been a real game changer in the sense that we're able to put those web apps, those sort of browser-based apps, in the hands of operations managers who are not typically, techie geeks in any kind of way, but who will need to be interacting with their information system for decision making. So it makes the process a lot more fluid rather than have to go through the information manager every time. And so once these polygons are validated, they start to populate your risk map. And once you have those hazards, the next one comes along. So which of these hazards are you going to be addressing first? Where are we going to have the maximum impact? Whose preferences and needs are you going to be taking into account? Is it national development goals? Is it local community needs? If you say local community needs, are you going to be clearing the school first or the hospital first? So essentially, we run the risk literally of generating or seeding new conflict by the very fact of clearing up after conflict. So that's something, and especially with the humanitarian principle of do no harm, we have to be very, very aware of that. And so another role for GIS here is to make that decision process as transparent as possible through essentially sort of applying site suitability almost. So we've put together an app there, which runs as a web app in the INSMA environment, and it scores hazards according to criteria defined by the stakeholders themselves. So in this case, roads, schools, hospitals, and provides an indication, quite a transparent indication of which hazards are having the most impact. Okay, so once you have mapped your risk, you've got your risk mapped out, you've prioritized it, then you can start clearance. So that's when you really send your demining teams, and they, like I was saying earlier, it's a grueling task. It's literally inch by inch digging up the land. Again, GIS has a role to play in the monitoring process of this. You can see here the different clearance lanes that are very visible and lend themselves very well to drone mapping. Now, it's not that drones are ubiquitous across the mine action sector, but it's definitely being used more and more for rapid monitoring of progress. And at the end of the information management chain, again, we use, again, Esri's dashboard environments to provide these either local, operational, or national, or even global level dashboards that provide in sort of day-to-day indication of progress, and ultimately return all of this land to productive use. I'm hitting my 15 minutes, so I had a few sort of bonus slides to looking ahead at sort of the sort of new challenges that we're facing, which are namely to do with urban environments. All of the new conflicts I was telling you about are happening in urban environments, 3D contamination, and so there again, we're experimenting with GIS to help us provide a sort of information management framework to manage contamination in 3D, but I'll have to leave that for next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Olivier. Gosh, that was certainly very different. So this is a question from me, Olivier. You do all this work, and you showed us some stats about the sort of number of casualties arising from these mines. How enormously dangerous is it for the people who are actually doing the mine clearing? What are the kind of statistics that you get for accidents?
Actually, yeah, I mean, it's obviously a let's say a daunting task, to say the least. But the statistics are very good. Humanitarian mine action is the subsector of humanitarian action, which probably has the most mature set of standards and quality standards, safety standards, for very obvious reasons. Mistakes are very expensive, so there are very, very strict protocols in place. I don't know if you saw some of the if you remember some of the slides that I was showing there with very strict marking, sort of marking practices and benchmarking safe areas, and a very, very meticulous, slow progress, which is what makes it so expensive as well, and why you need to be so efficient at the clearance task. You don't want to be doing clearance over large areas because it is simply so expensive, because it is so meticulous. The ballpark is that it costs about $1 to lay a mine and $1,000 to take it out. That's basically the sort of the saying in the sector. So accidents happen. They do happen, but they're in the sort of single digits every couple years kind of thing, as opposed to you know, some a sort of sure death exercise,
Right.
thanks to those standards.
Yeah. Okay. And Ed asks, what is the best tangible way for all of our audience to get involved and to support you guys?
Very nice question. I can obviously distribute our contact information. Maybe we can do that through the mail list here. We're always on the lookout for you know, skilled personnel in GIS and information management. Data is also a really useful thing for us. So contextual data, especially when we're doing the sort of risk, the calculations on risk. So so one of the data sets that we're using, for example, is Facebook's Data for Good, which provides us with a lot of population data, which then allows us to calculate and assess and prioritize better. So please do get in touch with any thoughts you might have. So I focused a lot on Esri, and that is the core of our system. And that is our default for sure. There are certain places where, for example, due to sanctions, we can't deploy US commercial software. So there we have to look at alternative tools. So any alternative tools that also provide us with this sort of plan B approach, or you know, a sort of safety net with that respect is also